Starweaver's Daughter. The night over the meadow was quiet and cool, with dew rising from the grass like the breath of the earth. A faint silver glow unraveled above the tree line. Not a thunderbolt or a falling star, but a soft curtain of light opening as if the sky itself had decided to breathe. From that light stepped a girl whose beauty felt like a memory you could almost place skin washed in pale lavender. Eyes deep as oceans seen from orbit, hair that drifted as if the air were water and every strand remembered the tides. On her shoulder perched a tiny dragon, emerald-scaled and bright-eyed, with wings that trembled and left faint gold dust in their fluttering wake. The craft behind them folded itself, smaller and smaller until it was no more than a coin of light in the grass, humming once and falling silent. The girl took one slow breath, tasting the sweetness of crushed clover and damp soil. The dragon chirped, a sound half bell and half bird, nuzzling her cheek. She smiled, and something in the meadow seemed to relax, as though the earth recognized the kindness in her and welcomed it. Not far away, a man paused on the path by the fence that ran along the field. He had come here many nights to be alone with the stars and his thoughts. He carried the kind of tiredness that wasn't just in the body, but also in the hands that remembered work and the heart that remembered loss. Tonight, when the glow touched the grass, he set down his thermos, felt his pulse quicken, and told himself he was only going closer to learn what kind of meteor had landed. He saw her, then the girl, the dragon, the vanishing shape of the craft, and he stopped as if someone had called his name. The dragon tilted its head at him curiously and let out a tiny puff of luminous steam. The girl's gaze found his, and in it he saw neither threat nor fear, only discovery, as if he were the first page of a book she had always wanted to read. "Hello," she said, and her voice was clear without being loud. "Is this place called Earth?" "It is," he answered, amazed at how steady he sounded. "And this is my well, my favorite field." Her smile was gentle. "Then we have landed in a good place." The dragon hopped from her shoulder, flitted to a fence post, and sat there like a jeweled gargoyle, watching with bright, clever eyes. The man stepped nearer, palms open, as one does when approaching a deer. He looked back toward the road, half expecting someone else to appear and confirm that he was not dreaming. But the field remained empty, the night remained soft, and only the three of them seemed to exist in the entire world. "I'm Ethan," he said at last. "I don't know if you shake hands where you're from." "We do," she replied, taking his hand with surprising warmth. "I am Alira. This is Cytherin." At the sound of his name, the little dragon lifted his chin and gave a tiny, proud trill. Ethan laughed, a sound he had not made from the center of himself in a long time. The dragon twitched his wings and seemed to accept that laughter as appropriate praise. A breeze slid through the grasses. Crickets stitched the night together. Alira glanced upward at the moon. "Your world sings more loudly than any I have heard," she said. Ethan followed her gaze. "Sings? All living worlds have a tone," she said. "A note that gathers in the stones and the rivers, the growing things and the breathing creatures. Some sing softly, barely a hum, but your earth is a choir joy and ache, fear and wonder, grief and gratitude. It is." Full, he thought about it, scratching the back of his neck, embarrassed to be so moved by a sentence from a stranger. He had not given himself permission to call Earth beautiful in a long time. Beauty, after all, had insisted on leaving him more than once. "We are full," he said, "sometimes too full." Alira walked a few steps into the meadow, letting her fingertips brush the seed heads. Where I'm from, she said, our cities float along wind streams and rest on rings of crystal. We built them so we would not wound our lands. But our hunger for brightness, more power, more song grew faster than our wisdom. The balance failed. Our skies dimmed. The dragons that once wove harmony into the air began to vanish. Cithran's kind were caretakers, interpreters of the world's song. Without them, our music thinned. Cithran cooed, hopping closer to Ethan's boot and sniffing it with theatrical suspicion. Ethan crouched, extending a finger. The dragon touched it with the tip of his warm snout, and something like a spark passed no pain. Just a little lightning of recognition. Alira watched them with a softness that made Ethan look away. I came to listen, she said, and to learn how you bear so much sound inside one planet without breaking it. I heard Earth from far away. I followed the resonance. When we opened our path, the pitch brightened, as if your world noticed us. Ethan stood again. We break it sometimes, he said, but it keeps singing. Maybe that's why we can keep going, because it keeps going with us. They walked under the slow-turning sky. A barn owl passed overhead like a whisper. Scythron fluttered along the fence posts, occasionally snapping up a moth, then puffing a dignified ring of pale fire in triumph. Alira told Ethan about her people's woven archives, memories stored as chords within glass, entire lives preserved as symphonies. She had studied them as a child. When her teachers played certain chords, she could feel the heat of old sun on her face and smell the rain of a vanished spring. She told him that dragons could shape resonance, strengthening the bonds between living things, that once a year the dragons gathered to braid a great planetary chorus. They called it the binding. After the last strong binding, there had been only fractured attempts. Then silence. What silenced them? Ethan asked. Pride, Alira said simply. Ours. They reached a small knoll at the center of the field. Ethan came here to look at the lights of the town and remember that stars were larger lights further away. He sat on the grass. Alira sat beside him. Cithran landed between them, tucked his wings, and made a purring sound so contented that Ethan felt it travel along his ribs. My wife used to like this place, Ethan said, and the sentence surprised him because he had not planned to say it. We would come with a blanket and coffee and let the night pull everything tight and quiet. She got sick. Then it was just me and the coffee. Alira did not fill the silence with pity. I am sorry, she said. In our archives, love has a tone of its own, distinct from every other human emotion we have recorded. It sounds like a note that belongs to two instruments at once. I don't know music, he said, and then he smiled despite the ache. But I know what you mean. A long, easy hush settled. The moon climbed. Somewhere across the field a fox barked. The dragon slept and dreamed, little flickers of light passing beneath his eyelids. When Alira spoke again, her words were careful. Cithran is young, but he carries a seed of the old song in him. Sometimes, when a place is ready to be heard, he can draw its tone into a shape that the heart understands. Show me, Ethan said, and then added, if you want to. Alira lifted the dragon onto her palms. He woke with a squeak, then stretched, wings unfurling with a faint, crystalline rustle. She sang not a melody with words, but a simple line, steady as breath. It sounded like the first thing anyone might sing if they had to begin the world with a single note. Cithran listened, and the membranes of his wings caught the moonlight and changed it, tinting it bluer, then greener, then tender gold. The grasses around them seemed to lean in. Ethan felt pressure in his chest, not painful, just a tide coming in. The dragon opened his mouth and exhaled a ring of fire that gave off no heat. It rose and expanded until it became a thin, glowing veil before them. In that veil, images gathered not images exactly, but textures and feelings that the mind translated as pictures because it knew no other way. He saw the town at the edge of the field, its windows like held candles. He saw the river at noon, slick and laughing over stones. He saw the hospital room where his wife had lain. And then he saw the field again with the two of them within it. And the note Alira sang threaded all of it together until it felt less like a pile of moments and more like a woven blanket. He saw the first time he had come here alone after she was gone. The way he had pretended to watch the stars while he hid from the room that had become too quiet to bear. He saw himself now, and he saw that he had kept living, which had seemed impossible from the center of the worst days. The veil thinned. The ring dissolved. The dragon looked very pleased with his own work and demanded a scratch under the chin, which Ethan supplied with reverence. Alira breathed out. "It is not magic," she said, though she knew it felt like that. "It is only the truth made visible for a moment." Only Ethan repeated and laughed huskily. "You say only like someone who has grown up around miracles." She tilted her head. "We forget to be astonished, sometimes, where I'm from. I think that is another reason our song dimmed." They rose and began to walk the perimeter of the field. Alira asked about the names of trees. Ethan told her, maple and birch, oak and ash. She repeated them, giving each name a small bow, as if greeting another being. He asked about the material of her craft. "A kind of memory glass," she said. "It bends light in ways that the universe recognizes as permission." He frowned in good humor and told her he was a mechanic and that this was the most beautiful nonsense he had ever heard. They reached the copse where the meadow thickened into shadow. The air changed there. It always did. The creek ran through, hidden by brush, whispering rocks to cleanness. Scythron sniffed the dark and bristled. "What is it?" Alira asked softly. Ethan heard it too. Something like a broken chord, a dissonance, faint but insistent, as if a string deep beneath the soil had been plucked and left to thrash out of tune. A smell came with it, the sharp temps of metal and something older, sour as a wound. "This is where the storm took down the old power line," Ethan said. "They fixed it, but they left the husk and the scar. Kids used to come here to smash bottles. The land never quite settled after that." Alira put her palm to the bark of a young maple, and her face grew very still. "There's a tangle here," she said. "Nothing catastrophic, just a knot that makes the song thin and brittle. In time, life would work around it. But since we are here..." Scythron hopped to the ground, as if he had been waiting his entire life to be useful in exactly this place. Alira stepped into the copse, bare feet on stones. Ethan watched her stand there and begin to hum a different sound now, lower, patient, like a gentle hand working a stubborn thread back into a weave. The dragon lifted his wings and fanned them in a slow rhythm. The air felt denser, kinder. The creek's whisper sharpened into a clear line. Ethan could hear his own breathing fall into time with all of it. He felt foolish. And then he did it anyway. He touched the nearest bush, the leaves cool and slick. And he thought the kind of wordless thank you that once he would have aimed at his wife, when she handed him a mug of coffee the way she always had. He had not thanked anything out loud for a long time. The thought startled him with its simplicity. Alira's hum shifted. She smiled, eyes still closed. "Yes," she murmured. "That helps." "What helps?" he asked, embarrassed. "Your thank you," she said. "It is a pure tone. Humans think it is small, but it is strong. It tells the world it is seen." He swallowed around something thick. "How do you hear that?" "Cithrin hears. I feel. And you are closer to your world than you admit." She opened her eyes. "It is done." He could not have said what had changed, only that the dissonance was gone, and in its place was a quiet like a hand smoothing hair. A quiet that did not erase the creek or the insects or the distant highway, but gathered them into something that fit together better than it had 10 minutes earlier. They returned to the open grass. The stars seemed lower now, though he knew they were not. He offered her coffee from his thermos. She accepted, held it between her palms, and smiled when the warmth reached her skin. "We drink light," she said, "but this is like drinking a remembered afternoon." He told her about the shop where he repaired engines that were older than some of their owners, about the satisfaction of a machine sighing back to life, about afternoons so ordinary they had become holy only after they were gone. She told him about the school in the sky where students learned to weave the records of their days into chords, and how once she had been chosen to play a line so perfect it made everyone in the room cry without knowing why. "The instructor said it was because I had not tried to make it perfect," she said. "I had only tried to tell the truth." "Sounds like my wife," he said, smiling toward the ground. She never pretended to be more than she was, and somehow she was more than anyone. Alira looked at him with the respectful attention you offer someone who has just said a thing that reveals the shape of their heart. "You carry her tone with you," she said. "It is one reason we found you. Earth is crowded, but certain notes stand out." He blinked. "You followed me." "We followed the field," she corrected gently. "And then we heard you better than the rest." The horizon was paling by the time they noticed how long they had been walking. Dawn came like a soft decision. In the east, the first birds began. Cithrin, who had been brave all night, yawned hugely, curled around Elia's wrist, and fell asleep, his tiny sides rising and falling with contentment. "I have to leave when the light is full," Alira said. "Travel is easiest then, when the sky's fabric is taut." He had known it, of course. The beauty of the night had been sharpened by the knowledge that it could not last. But he still felt the tug in his chest, the old ache that arrived whenever a good thing prepared to walk away. "Will you come back?" he asked, trying not to let his voice plead. "Yes," she said simply. "If I can. If your world welcomes us, it will," he said, and surprised himself by how sure he was. He had no authority to speak for Earth. He only knew his field, his town, the way his chest felt looser now than it had when he arrived, the way the copse no longer hummed with discomfort. He knew the way the dragon's small weight had become familiar when it perched on his knee. He knew he had said thank you to leaves and meant it. Alira stepped closer, and for a moment he saw how young she was, brave, yes, and learned, but also simply a person who had crossed a great distance for love of a song. She placed her hand lightly over his heart. "Listen," she said, "not to me, to this." He did. He heard the blood in him. He heard the breath. He heard, or imagined he heard, the note of the field, which was not a sound but a presence, the way a house with the lights on feels different from a house gone dark. He heard the memory of his wife's laugh. He heard a kind of permission he had not expected to hear again. "Your world is not broken beyond repair," she said. "Neither are you." He nodded, because words were too clumsy. She withdrew her hand, and the place where it had rested seemed to keep a little warmth. They walked back to where the craft had folded itself into its seed of light. Alira raised her palm. The coin brightened, lifted, and unfolded like a flower opening in time-lapse. The ramp extended, smooth as poured water. Cithrin stirred, blinked, and then trilled a sleepy farewell. He fluttered to Ethan's shoulder one last time, pressed his forehead to Ethan's cheek, and left a dusting of warm, glimmering motes that smelled fleetingly of rain on hot stone. "Thank you," Ethan said, voice rough. The dragon puffed a tiny ring and returned to Alira's hand. She looked at Ethan in a way that made him feel seen without being exposed. "When you stand here alone again," she said, "and the night is kind, sing something small to the grass. It will be enough." "I don't sing," he said automatically. "You breathe," she said. "That is the beginning of singing." He laughed, and it didn't hurt to do it. "All right." She took a step backward up the ramp. The wind picked up, then calmed. The craft's hull gathered the morning light around itself as if it were an extra layer of metal. She hesitated, then reached into the small pouch at her waist and withdrew a thin, translucent shard the size of his thumbnail. It looked like glass that had learned how to be a drop of water without ever falling. "A token," she said, placing it in his palm. "If you press it to your heart and think of us, it will glow when we are within listening distance. It does not call us. It only tells the truth about nearness." He closed his fingers around it. "I'll keep it safe." "Let it keep you," she replied. The ramp lifted. The seams vanished. The craft hummed at a frequency that made the hairs on his arms rise, not in fear but in attention, as if every atom wanted to face toward it. The meadow smelled briefly of lightning. Then the ship rose, not quickly, not with a roar, just steadily, like a thought returning to the mind that had sent it out. It slipped into the brightening sky and became a small glint. And then, not even that. Ethan stood with the shard in his hand until the sun's edge broke over the trees. The birds made morning into a festival. He breathed in, breathed out, and realized that he had learned something while he wasn't looking. How to inhabit the same world that had contained both the best of his days and the worst of them. Without flinching away from either, he put the shard against his chest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, faint and faithful, it warmed and gave off a soft, pearly glow, not visible from far away, but visible to him. He laughed again, this time with no cracks in it, and slipped the shard into the pocket over his heart, on the path back toward the road. He felt the field at his back, the way you feel a house where someone you love is waiting in the window. He turned once and lifted a hand in a useless, happy gesture, as if the sky could see him. Then he went home, where the kettle and the cups waited, and the day would ask the same ordinary things it always asked, and he would answer them with a little more music in his voice than before. He returned that night, and the night after that, sometimes singing under his breath, sometimes only humming, sometimes thinking the kind of thank you that Alira had called a tone. The copse stayed quiet, mended in its invisible places. The fox barked, the owl hunted, the creek ran. On certain evenings, for no reason he could have named, the shard warmed and glowed softly, and he smiled and spoke to the air as if it could carry words further than sound. When summer burned itself into a deeper green and the crickets thickened the edges of sleep, he felt the glow flare stronger. He looked up. The sky opened again, like a book he had learned how to read. The craft unfolded. Alira and Cytherin stepped down into the grass with the uncomplicated joy of travellers who have come home to a place that is not theirs and yet is. The dragon arrowed toward him and landed on his shoulder as if no days had passed at all. Ethan, who had not thought of himself as a man who welcomed miracles, welcomed them like friends and did not apologize for how easily his eyes filled. "You came back," he said. "We heard you," Alira said. "We heard the field, and we needed to learn more." They walked the meadow and the town roads and the riverside, and when they found small knots in the song, they hummed and breathed and thanked until those places loosened. They taught Ethan to listen. He taught them to fix a stubborn lawnmower engine, a reciprocating saw, the hinge of a barn door that squealed like an offended cat. The exchange felt fair. He told them about the day his wife had written a list of very small things to look forward to: peaches, a postcard from her sister, the neighbour's ridiculous garden nomso that she would not drown in the scale of what could not be fixed. Alarujo understood planets and dragons, and Cords listened reverently to the list as to a sacred text. The next day she handed him a small folded paper, on which she had written her own list, the exact shade of the creek at noon, the point of Cytherin's tail, the names of trees learning to belong in her mouth, the taste of his coffee. He kept the paper in the same pocket as the shard. When autumn arrived, they stood under the reddening trees and breathed the spicy air, and Alira told him she would have to leave for longer to carry what she had learned back across the dark. He did not ask her to stay. He did not tell her not to go. They had both learned that asking a song to hold one note forever is a way to ruin it. "Will you bind your world again?" he asked. "I don't know," she said, "but I will try. And I will remember that the most faithful instruments are often the quietest ones." They stood for a long time without speaking. Cytherin curled at their feet, dreaming his bright, simple dreams. Finally, Ethan said, "You changed my field. You changed my listening," she said. They said goodbye without naming it goodbye, and when the craft rose again, the shard warmed in his pocket until it felt like a small, patient heart. The winter that followed was not easier than other winters, but it was truer. He sang when he remembered to. He thanked more often than he did not. He mended what he could in the places he loved, and sometimes in the places he simply walked through. On a hard morning, he pressed the shard to his chest and stood in the doorway until the glow steadied. He laughed once, shook his head at himself, and went to work. Spring returned. The field remembered how to be soft. One evening, as the sun drained itself into the horizon, the sky opened like an old friend opening arms. Alira and Cytherin stepped out, as beautiful and unlikely as the first time, which is to say, exactly as real. The dragon landed on his head, this time like a crown, and refused to move until he had been properly praised. Alira's smile held relief. "We braided a small binding," she said. "Not the grand kind we lost, but enough to remind our heir how to hold itself." "You did it," he said. "We started," she corrected, humility worn not as punishment, but as grace. "We will keep starting." They stood together at the knoll while darkness gathered and the town lit its windows. He reached into his pocket, touched the shard, then let it rest. He did not need its glow to know they were near. He could hear it, the meadow's tone, her quiet breath, the dragon's little purr, his own heart keeping time. He turned his face to the wind and felt the world sing through him without breaking anything. The night did what nights do, it carried them gently into morning. And though they would part again, they were no longer strangers to the space between parting and return. The field, which had watched them learn, held their footprints until the dew rose and made the grass new. The creek kept its line. The fox and the owl honored their agreements with the dark. The small town slept and woke and slept again, good and flawed and worthy. And in a pocket over a mechanic's heart, a tiny shard of memory glass lay quiet, ready to glow whenever the sky breathed open, ready to tell the truth about nearness, ready to remind anyone who asked that even in a world that carries so much sound, there is a note you can always find if you are willing to listen.